surveillance is something that may be qualitatively different for the younger generation. What we consider to be surveillance may be social network. Right? A couple of things. In the construct that you're building, I'm curious, government seems to become the bad person in this sort of run, the USB. And might it not be that the providers of the private sector that's building these sorts of things, government is also sort of a regulator of this activity. It should be good things as well. And I'm curious if that is something that you're factoring into the construct that you're building in terms of how we should look at the protection of privacy, if it really exists as a function of government here. Not just using it to get information about people, but defining it in such a way that we're actually trying to protect people from the private sector.
I couldn't agree with you more. I don't see the government as a baddie, as you suggest. I'm really just saying governments seem to have been rather reticent so far to discuss this. There's been lots of discussion about safety and legal issues, but that's been driven by industry who see that as the last barrier to pushing this into the civilian sector. That's fair enough, that's where they're coming from, but we have to recognise that. And we have to say, right, what's our position on this? What do we want as a society? And the government, as you rightly say, could be using it for surveillance on law enforcement. They need to be checked. There need to be checks and balances, oversight, accountability, discussion about what it's to be used for, what sort of targets, if we're talking about law enforcement. But also, as you rightly say, they can regulate it to the extent that private industry wants to use it as a form of assessing their assets and vulnerabilities, etc. So no, I would entirely agree with what you have to say. And I take the point too about what we mean by privacy. The younger generation may well see it quite differently. And even the older generation, like myself, we talk about privacy or privacy. You're infecting me already. We talk about privacy, but at the end of the day, when the chips are down, we may see it as a sort of trade-off, a quid pro quo, a bit more security, a bit less privacy. Okay, I'll on. So I think a lot of research needs to be done in terms of these concepts.
If I could just follow up real fast, all of us who are in here with an Apple or Android device, we have a problem that we're learning about. And this data that we learned about very quickly to those devices, any sort of type of operation where an agency or a corporation wants to sell us something, right, could make that need. So this is a sort of surveillance that is passive. It exists right here in this room. Yeah. So it's a cost-benefit analysis that all of us are making.
Very definitely.
Colonel Hart, you have a question.
Mike, is there ability to manage everything that's electronic in my house and know when I run my dishwasher, how much power I'm using, whether or not I'm charging my electric car, and if I'm using my disposal, should I be more worried about your current employer or your former employer knowing everything about my life?
Good question. One, the information that transmits back from your home is anonymized, so it's attributable to you and your home. And this is a very early footprint, and California, to their credit, has very strict requirements on the sharing or inadvertent revelation of personal information. So there's a lot of structures in place to protect that. I would certainly be less concerned about the utility than the company who built the device that you plugged into your home area network. And again, it's not to impugn that company, but there's far less rigor, and there's probably competing demands to get out a product to make it functional. And it is certainly from my point of view, and probably others who are in the security business, usually security is the last feature that's forced into a product sometime.
If I might frame a larger context, because as I was listening, we had a diverse panel on a variety of subjects, but there was a couple of major themes that were running through, and I'll ask the panelists to comment, but maybe get the audience to think about it. But it seems like with the infrastructure world, this whole construct of risk analysis and assessment is putting a lot of stress on our work environment in terms of how do we do it, where we do it. in a number of the presentations. Jimmy's presentation had some of that. I heard it in the Colonel's presentation. You know, this whole, and Zen, even in Zhang's presentation, of how do we deal with probabilistic systems when engineering tends to want to be a very exact discipline, and that with infrastructure it seems to be that risk analysis is permeating a lot of it. And what are y'all experiencing in that, and how do we tackle that problem? Because we've got multitudes of risk assessment systems. Everybody's trying to tackle the problem. What are you all seeing in this environment? And it's open to any one of you. Jim, do you have your hand raised? Go ahead.
All right. For my country, different perspectives from different countries. So we don't have much of problems with terrorism. Okay. What we have is natural disasters. We have 8 to 15 typhoons in summer seasons, and so each year we have to conquer with those kind of problems. And we have to know where is our assets or facilities located, and is located in a very safe place or is located in a very dangerous place. And we also have to know who is using the facilities and how many people live in these areas, and what kind of outcome will be in economic impacts. That's what we're doing the risk assessment for our critical infrastructures. So what we can see for our x-axis is we don't have those kind of statues of liberties. We don't have those kind of things because we don't have too much of a problems with the terrorism. But we do have a problems with like a Japan, like an earthquake, a tsunami, or landslides, something like that. That's all problems.
Okay. Other thoughts, Colonel?
Yeah, when you think of risk, you should break down risk. And in the case of projects, or in my focus was on construction, we look at the construction risks and other things. So you identify those risks, you develop mitigation to those risks, and then you implement those mitigation factors and monitor to ensure that those risks do not come about. When we look at, and here's the thing, is that the follow-up. If we look at over the history of the construction, and I'm focusing on the situation that I gave, we look over the history of what we've done in construction. In my opinion, it was the operational risk was overlooked. And when we started to see failure of all these multi-million-dollar projects, once they were complete, they were done, and then they would fail in operation. It should be a feedback mechanism to tell you that something's wrong. Something's wrong. And then you adjust and adjust the procedures or adjust your operational mechanisms to address that failure. And so if you don't do that, then you're guaranteed to do it over and over and over again. So I think effort should be placed in actually, we always talk about risk, but actually are we really defining it? Where is it? And then are we reacting to it?
Okay. Yes, sir.
Mr. McDonald, who should we be putting the efforts on for this feedback to the next, commander or whoever's going to take on the next construction mission?
Well, it depends. I would say that you've got a number of large players involved. You got USAID, you've got the embassies, Department of State involved, and when we look at the Corps of Engineers, you've got NGOs involved. So you got to look at the hierarchy, who's really responsible. The Corps of Engineers, from the organization I was working with, is the executor of the projects. They go and make the project. They can provide feedback, but once they're told to go, you will execute, they execute. So to answer your question, it would have, from what I was seeing, was the information was coming back. I don't know who should be changing the mechanism. I really don't. I mean, in my opinion, I would say that it would be maybe the Department of State. or maybe that military commander looking at the failure, because they were constantly going back and saying, these things are failing, why are we going back and trying to retrofit now? And then it didn't seem like there was a major strategic plan to adjust what we were doing in regard to construction.
Sir, who were you asking, like when you saw the failure happen, who did you, for that project there, who did you go to ask?
Well, I addressed it with the BRT, the British Embassy. They had a consulate there. It was brought up that way because they were funding some of the projects of the person who's funding it, as well as through my chain of command through the district commander, then to the division commander, who would then be, at the time was working directly for General Petraeus.
Okay. We have time for 2 more questions. Joe, you get the second one.
Yes, I think it's a very interesting set of discussions to kind of wrap up the symposium. And the reason is because the thing that y'all are bringing up more clearly has been sort of underlying all the other discussions, and even the Assistant Secretary's comments last night. And to me, I would sum that up as being the continuum between the power of the government versus to completely control everything, down to private industry and private individuals to control everything. And that continuum is really controlling everything, whether you engage in RAMCAP or whether you PS prep or what other preparations. Somewhere on that continuum is the incentive or the direction to make things happen. And I think that's really what y'all have brought to the head, is where does government sort of fit into this? Now, I could ask the question, I think, is where should we be on that continuum today? And I probably would get the answer of, well, there's an ongoing debate, and we'll work it out as time goes on. I think that's kind of the typical answer. I think the more pertinent question for this panel and for this group is, what is the role of the design professional in that debate and in that discussion? Where do we not stand up to the argument, and what should we be advocating for?
Well, to me, I think the industry should be advocating for more research funding. From my experience with industry, and also just what I saw from Michael's presentation, is that industry does recognize that they are now looking at the widest range of possible events. They have taken the responsibility of considering, oh, there might be a high impact but low probability event, and we need to prepare for that. So I don't think there needs to be more regulation on that front. But the technology to achieve the level of security that society expects, and maybe society would request more in the future, is not there. And instead of using money to have more regulation, that money could go towards more research institutions. One of the biggest challenges for the electric grid is nobody knows how secure is secure. So the presentation, some of the presentations I saw were great about modeling real-time situational awareness. That's what we always talk about in the electric industry. That is something that is being developed, and if it gets to the marketplace faster, I think everyone would feel better about the situation. So if there's more government funding for research, then that could be a great solution. So use your lobbyist money that way.
I will add one, and being in a room of engineers, I'm going to commit a heresy here, but in my time at Maryland, I found that we had very strong partnerships with our law school and young attorneys, because they have very strong analytical skills. They're slightly different angle than we, and I'm talking about business-oriented attorneys, not regulatory attorneys, but there's a whole class of legal minds out there that are very analytical that could be helpful to us. So I think you brought that to bear here in your discussions. And other thoughts on Joe's question? Yeah, go ahead.
I've got a tangential one. I'm interested in the government-public-private sector relationship. In Canada, we have a very particular situation in that the provinces have prime responsibility. Where there's any area of doubt, it devolves to the province, not to the central government, which is different from yours. And it does mean that any central, federal or confederal government that wants to take the lead and lead the way forward and try and enforce, if you like, standards is in a very difficult position. Now, you need people who are aggressive and positive doing that. Personally, it's no secret to say, I just published a paper on it, that I have criticised the Canadian government for not pushing harder on a leadership role. And it's been the private sector that have come up with initiatives. It's been sporadic, not uniform across, but they've come up with initiatives, and because they've taken the lead for so long, they are going to resent government moving in and saying, oh no, you shouldn't do that, you should do it this way. So that relationship is quite key to getting that right. I have to say, when I was involved with critical infrastructure in the UK, our experience was that on the whole, the private sector did not take intentional threats very seriously. Their position was, most of the incidents we'll face are natural accidents, etc. That's where we're going to put our resources. So they weren't very keen to spend money on the wicked risks. But we had a system there, because it's a unified government, that we could say, well, actually, if you want to hold any sensitive assets in your plant, then we are requiring you to comply with these requirements. So it was very much a regulatory position of the central government. So that relationship is quite interesting, how it's resolved. I don't have any answers to it, but I think it's certainly one we need to look at carefully. And from an ethics point of view, which concerns me, I think this needs to be very centrally in the training, or whether it's whatever professional we're talking about in this business.
Okay, I think we've run our course, unless there's a burning question.